a wooden box buried in the ground. No power cord running to it, no refrigerant line, no thermostat, no connection to any infrastructure of any kind. The lid is flush with the surface. You could walk over it without knowing it was there. And inside that box, in the middle of July, when the air above it is 34 degrees Celsius and has been for 2 weeks, carrots are crisp, potatoes are firm, apples are not only uneaten but not even soft yet. Eggs laid 10 days ago are still fresh. Cheese wrapped in cloth is intact, rind dry, interior preserved. And the jar of leftover soup from 4 days ago is cold enough that condensation forms on the outside when you pull it out into the summer air. No electricity, no ice, no technology newer than a shovel and a wooden plank. Just a box, buried deep enough that the earth around it maintains a temperature that has nothing to do with the season above it, because the earth at depth does not experience seasons the way the surface does. It stores heat slowly and releases it slowly, averaging across the entire year, sitting at a temperature that is cool enough to preserve food for weeks without anything mechanical ever running, ever wearing out, or ever sending you a utility bill. This is an underground cold box, sometimes called a poor man's refrigerator, sometimes a modern interpretation of a root cellar, and in its simplest form, nothing more than a well-insulated container placed at sufficient depth in the ground that the thermal mass of the surrounding earth keeps it cool, regardless of surface conditions. The materials for the basic version cost between $15 and $40, depending on what you already have. The installation takes 1 afternoon of digging. The operating cost is zero. The maintenance requirement is essentially nothing beyond occasionally checking that the lid seal is intact and no moisture has infiltrated the box. And the food preservation performance, for the categories of food it handles best, Wanka, is comparable to a standard electric refrigerator operating in the 4 to 12 degrees Celsius range and not identical, comparable. Enough to keep a household's produce, dairy, eggs, and leftovers safely preserved through hot summer weeks without drawing a single watt of electricity. Enough to function as emergency food storage when the power goes out. Enough to represent a genuine, functional, zero-cost alternative to one of the most energy-intensive appliances in the modern home, using knowledge that is so old it existed before the concept of electricity had been imagined. The physics that makes this possible has been formally studied in soil science, architectural engineering, and passive cooling research with consistent results across decades of documented work. Research published in the journal Energy and Buildings examining underground temperature stability in temperate climates confirmed that at depths of 1 to 1.5 meters, soil temperature in most temperate regions stabilizes between 8 and 14 degrees Celsius year-round, with variation of only a few degrees between summer and winter, compared to surface temperature swings that can span 40 degrees or more in the same location across the same 12 months. The Oak Ridge National Laboratory has published research on earth contact cooling as a passive temperature management strategy for buildings and storage facilities, confirming the viability of ground temperature as a reliable and predictable cooling resource. The USDA's Agricultural Research Service has studied underground food storage in the context of farm-scale food preservation and documented temperature performance data for underground root cellar structures that directly validates the physics operating in a small buried box. Traditional building techniques in Scandinavia, Russia, and northern Canada, cultures with extensive experience storing food through extreme seasonal temperature swings, incorporated underground storage chambers as standard architectural elements for centuries, precisely because the ground's thermal stability was understood and relied upon as a preservation resource. This is not experimental, it is not alternative, it is physics that has been understood and applied since the first human civilization figured out that food buried in the earth stayed edible longer than food stored on the surface. You've already felt the thermal mass effect of the ground without connecting it to food preservation. Think about entering a basement on a hot summer day, the immediate drop in temperature as you descend below grade, the cool air that requires no air conditioning to maintain. That temperature difference is ground thermal mass in action, working passively, continuously, without any mechanical input, simply because the earth below the frost line responds to seasonal temperature change so slowly that its temperature at any given moment reflects the average of months past, rather than the conditions of the current day. You've also felt it if you've ever dug a garden bed in summer and noticed how much cooler the soil is at spade depth than the surface that burned your bare feet. The cool is always there. It is always available. It sits a meter below your lawn right now, maintaining a temperature that would keep your leftovers fresh, your vegetables crisp, and your eggs safely stored if there were only a box at that depth with a lid, and the knowledge that the box should be there. Here is the mechanism stated plainly. The Earth has enormous thermal mass, the capacity to store heat energy. A large mass of material changes temperature slowly when the temperature of its surroundings changes, because the energy required to raise or lower the temperature of a large mass is proportionally large. The surface of the Earth changes temperature rapidly because it is thin and in direct contact with the highly variable air above it. But the soil 1 meter down is insulated from those surface variations by the mass of soil above it, which absorbs and releases heat slowly enough that surface temperature changes take months to fully penetrate to depth. The practical result is that while the air temperature above fluctuates dramatically through a 24-hour cycle and dramatically across seasons, the soil temperature at 1 meter of depth maintains a stable, moderate temperature year-round. Cool enough in summer to function as passive refrigeration, warm enough in winter to prevent contents from freezing in most temperate climates. A box placed in contact with that stable thermal mass maintains its internal temperature passively, with the Earth serving as both an insulator against surface fluctuations and a thermal reservoir that holds the box temperature steady. The box does nothing. The Earth does everything. The box simply exists at the intersection of food and physics. Here is how you build it, starting with the simplest version that demonstrates the principle before scaling to a larger installation. You need a food-grade wooden box or crate, a sturdy wine crate, a wooden tool chest, any clean wooden container with a fitting lid works for initial use, or a food-grade plastic container with a tight-fitting lid for a more durable version. You need a shovel, a location in a shaded area of your property, the north side of a building, under a tree canopy, anywhere that direct sunlight does not fall on the installation site during the hottest part of the day, and 3 to 4 hours of physical work. The shading is important because direct sunlight on the soil surface above a buried cold box heats the surrounding ground and reduces the thermal performance of the installation. Choose shade deliberately. Dig a hole deep enough to bury your container so that the lid sits at or just below ground level. For a standard 30-liter container, this means a hole approximately 70 to 90 centimeters deep enough to access the stable thermal mass of the subsoil rather than the fluctuating surface layer, which typically extends only 30 to 40 centimeters below grade in most temperate regions. Before lowering the container into the hole, line the bottom with 5 to 8 centimeters of gravel or small stones to provide drainage. Condensation will form inside any buried container, and without a drainage layer, water accumulates at the base and promotes mold and spoilage. Lower your container into the hole. Pack the sides with a mixture of soil and straw or dry leaves. The organic material adds insulation and slows heat transfer between the container and the warmer surface soil near the top of the installation. At ground level, build an insulated lid covering, either a rigid foam insulation panel cut to extend beyond the container opening on all sides, and covered with a wooden board weighted against wind, or a double-walled wooden cover with a layer of straw between the inner and outer boards. The insulated lid is the critical element that separates a functioning cold box from a merely cool hole. Without it, heat transfer through the lid, which is the only part of the container exposed to above-grade conditions, significantly degrades the performance of the system in summer. A well-insulated lid keeps summer heat from entering the box from above while the Earth maintains cool conditions on all other sides. Stock the box with the food in sealed containers or wrapped appropriately. Access it quickly and deliberately. Every minute the lid is open allows warm air to displace the cool air inside, and cover it completely between access events. Here is what most people get wrong because the mistakes are consistent, and each one meaningfully reduces the performance of a system that is otherwise straightforward to build correctly. First mistake, insufficient depth. A box buried only 30 to 40 centimeters deep is still within the zone of surface temperature influence, the layer of soil that heats and cools substantially with the air above it. The stable thermal zone begins at approximately 60 to 70 centimeters in most temperate climates and becomes more stable with increasing depth to approximately 1 to 1.2 meters. If the depth of your installation is limited by bedrock, tree roots, or the water table, increase the insulation on all sides of the container to compensate for reduced thermal mass benefit. Second mistake, poor lid insulation. The lid is the thermal bridge of the system. An uninsulated wooden lid, in a location that receives morning sun will allow substantial heat transfer into the box during summer days, raising the internal temperature significantly above what the earth is maintaining on the sides and bottom. At minimum, cover the lid with a thick layer of straw held in place by a board. Better, build a simple double-wall insulated lid from 2 boards with 3 to 4 centimeters of rigid foam insulation between them. Best, locate the installation in full shade so the soil above the box never receives direct sunlight at all, reducing the lid insulation requirements substantially. Third mistake, no drainage layer at the base. Condensation inside a cold box is constant and significant. Warm air entering during access events deposits moisture as it cools inside the box. Without drainage, this moisture accumulates as standing water at the base of the container, promotes bacterial and mold growth, and spoils anything that sits in it. 5 centimeters of gravel at the base of the hole costs nothing and solves the problem permanently. Fourth mistake, storing ethylene-producing fruits adjacent to ethylene-sensitive vegetables without separation. Apples, pears, and tomatoes produce ethylene gas that accelerates the ripening and subsequent decay of leafy vegetables, carrots, and other ethylene-sensitive produce stored nearby. In any enclosed storage environment, underground box or otherwise, separate ethylene producers from sensitive crops,